Hey guys, I'm here with the man responsible for mules being OP, EMP being OP,
Nice.
Stim Marines being OP, Marauders one-shotting Nexuses. It's Dustin Browder.
Thanks, man.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. So we got a bunch of questions from the community, and we're just going to go right at it.
Great.
So we arrived yesterday, and someone told us that banelings are going to be able to move while burrowed.
Maybe.
Maybe?
Maybe. We'll see. Like everything we're showing here today, we'll see, right? Like, so if we were to sit here and carefully analyze the metagame, we would add nothing, right? Because it's going so well. And we don't feel like that's a cool expansion. So we're going to try to add stuff. And in that process, we're definitely going to take some chances. We're definitely going to experiment with some things and see how it goes. And that's what we're doing here today. So we've done a bunch of experiments. Some of these things are moderately well tested internally, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but at least they're moderately well tested. Some of these things are fairly untested internally, but we've said, we're going to BlizzCon, let's just show it and see what people think. So we're putting stuff out there, and we're going to watch and get a bunch of feedback, both from the community who's heard about it, and we're just going to obviously get feedback by watching people on the show floor play. We're going to get feedback from, we've got a bunch of computers downstairs, we can type in a bunch of stuff about your play experience, and we'll get that feedback, and we'll see where all this stuff goes. Some of it could make it, and a bunch of it could just totally get trashed, right? We've got plenty of time, even before beta, to make those types of decisions. And then obviously once we go to beta, we'll just have to have the courage to say, hey, this was really a cool idea, and it's not going in, right, if it fails in the beta.
Right. So you've been at the whole design balance process for years now,
yes.
Going into Wings of Liberty. What do you think has been your biggest success in the whole process and the biggest mistake that you guys have made as a design team?
So I think some of the stuff that I really love that we put together is we've managed to create a game that I think is worthy of the StarCraft name. We've created something that's got a level of balance, in a very short amount of time that is worthy of standing up and saying this can legitimately be called StarCraft. We've got 3 very diverse races. We've got, most of our matchups at least working very well across many leagues and ladders. Sometimes at high-level play, working very well, which is amazing as well. And we're seeing some amazing matches, coming out of this game. I mean, obviously the pros are making this happen for us, but they're able to use this game in a way. This is an instrument they can play to do some really amazing work, which is just absolutely awesome. In terms of stuff that, I'm less happy with, we've still got some missed opportunities out there in these races, things that, units that I wish we had been smarter about in the design process. For example, the Overseer is a unit that gives you food. There's never going to be any good spells in that unit, ever. There's no way to balance that unit to have good spells because it gives you food. So if it's got good spells, you're going to make a bazillion of them and you're going to wreck the game. And so we keep nerfing those abilities or making them kind of very niche in how they function. We were never able to put anything good on that unit because it was a unit that gave you food. It was flawed from a design. There was no way to balance that unit. And that's an example of something I think we can do better for in Heart of the Swarm, that we can replace that with something that hopefully feels a little bit more mighty, something that gives you some actual strategic choices instead of just sort of being dead weight on the tech tree.
Okay. And so this sort of follows up on that, but were there any processes that you went through in designing Wings of Liberty that you've like lessons learned where you said, we did it this way going into Wings of Liberty, and now that we realize there's these holes, this process can be better?
The process was fine. What was not fine was the knowledge was sometimes imperfect, right? Sometimes we tried things that we should have seen coming sooner were going to be a problem. And we gained a lot of knowledge being able to play the game live and seeing what's happening and play with the community over the last year plus in development. So I think we've gotten a lot smarter about what, where we're going with the balance and how to do a balance, and we can spot problems way more quickly in the design process. When we're pitching something, we can go, no, see, remember, it's just like that one time where we had Mothership do this, and you're like, oh yeah, that was a disaster, right? And so it's a lot easier for us to spot problems. I think we've gotten a lot more knowledgeable, and the community in many ways is very responsible for that in the sense they've been educating us, as we've been playing with them and as they've been posting and doing all these other things. We've been able to see as the pros play, as the community plays, we can see what works and see what doesn't. So we've gotten a lot smarter over the last year.
So with some of the new units and abilities, there's similarities or callbacks to old Brood War units. So with the Viper, you can kind of get that feel of the Defiler.
A little bit. It's different enough, but
yeah. They're all unique, but the Tempest with that, AOE against air, we can kind of look back to the expansion Brood War with Corsair being added.
Sure.
Was that intentional, or is it just?
No, it was an accident.
It was just an accident.
It was an accident, or maybe we're not that creative after all, right? But it was an accident. We didn't set out to, because the Corsair, feels so different in terms of its speed, its mobility. I certainly never thought of Corsair. And the Corsair is a very small AoE that's really designed for very packed units, right? And this is a big sweeping AoE. So we didn't really think of it that way, but you're right, there are definitely similarities.
Was there anything, looking back, 2020 hindsight, that you could have moved faster on, or shouldn't have moved so quickly on with regards to balance changes in Wings of Liberty?
I wish we'd gotten the bunker right quicker. Right, we oscillate on that one quite a little bit,
Right.
trying to make it work. There was some stuff that, we tried to push our luck a little bit, and sometimes it costs us. Sometimes it has real benefits. So, for example, when we put creep tumors in the game, everyone in the studio laughed at us and told us we were retarded, and that had to go. It was too weird, it was too awkward, and what does it matter anyway? Like, it's just a little speed boost. It's useless, right? And to be fair, at the time, that was fair feedback. And we did a bunch of tuning to make it a little better, but everybody got used to giving us that feedback, and they give us the same feedback again. This is a disaster. And then we went live with that in the game, and everybody's like, meh, that might be interesting one day. Probably not. You guys are kind of weird with the creep tumors, right? And there wasn't a lot of enthusiasm for us across a wide swath of people. And then, 2 or 3 months in, pretty soon casters were talking about creep spread. Right, and now here we are a year later, and it's a defining way of pointing out whether a Zerg player is effective or not. I think it's a really fun part of the game, and I think it adds a really unique feel to the Zerg race, right? So we do take chances. Sometimes they pay off, and sometimes we have Kadarian amulets, right? Which don't pay off, right? Where we're looking back on it, it's like, why did we think that was going to work, right? So you have to have a certain amount of courage to be able to make some decisions that are kind of scary.
Sure.
But then you've got to have the smarts also to know when you've gone too far, right? Because it's a total balancing act, right? So that, Kadarian Amulet, in retrospect, well, yeah, of course that's going to be too powerful. It's an instant Psy Storm in a race with Warpit. And we talked about that. And we're like, that's probably too much. And really should have seen that it was too much, I think much more quickly.
So you guys have been pretty open about, this philosophy of anything can get cut through the design process. But the message we always kind of get is, this just wasn't good enough. And is that kind of like a feeling thing?
It depends. Sometimes it depends on the unit. Like sometimes it doesn't fit with the metagame that we're seeing internally at the time, which can be terrifying because maybe if we went out with it 6 months later, it would work in the metagame, right? But at the time, it was stepping on something else and it failed. Sometimes it can be that there's no way to make this unit work and keep the rules simple. Right, like we might have. Let's look at the example of the replicant, for example. Say we have the replicant in the game right now, and we say right now you can't do massive. Okay, that's an okay rule. Can't do massive or workers. Okay, it's getting a little complicated, right? Because it's calling out a worker in kind of a weird way. Can't do massives or workers or energy units. Say we had to do that for balance reasons. Okay, this guy's getting weird, right? This tooltip's getting long. It's starting to feel awkward. There's a lot of rules you have to memorize to understand this unit, and the game is already crazy fast, so we can't have a bunch of rules. If we did that to every unit, it would be a disaster, and so we try to hold the line. So there would be an example where the unit has now wandered off into the weeds. The tooltip has got insanely long, and we're probably going to kill him. Like, we're done with him at that point. So that would be another reason that a unit could die, right? It just gets too complicated. And then they'll have units, too, that are very noob-unfriendly. Right? Let's give an example of the current Shredder, right? So here's a unit right now that I imagine that, if you're halfway decent, you can deal with. If you're a noob, these are going to get dropped in the back of your base every 5 minutes, and you're going to get all units will annihilate it. So we'll have to deal with that.
I did that yesterday.
Yeah, you'll do that to people, right? So we'll either have to add a warning sound, or delay his deploy time a lot longer, or not have him in the game, right? That'll be the options, right? Like, I don't know. I mean, there may be other options I'm not thinking of here, but so that would be an example why something would die. Like, yeah, sure, the diamond guys can handle it, but everybody else is dead, right? That's not cool, right? So there's a bunch of reasons. There's almost a unique reason per unit why it ultimately gets executed.
Sure.
But there's a bunch. And then, of course, if we see something, we're like, well, the pros are going to wreck us with that, right? Like, that's just going to be the dominant strategy. Then that also is a reason to kill.
So your design philosophy for each of the three races, we kind of get this message of Protosses, they're expensive.
Yep.
They're really strong. The Zerg are fast. Small, cheap, numerous.
Right.
A lot of people have been complaining about Terran in the community, and this was a question that came up over and over again. Was you look at Terran and they're kind of stoic and strong, and they have siege lines and bunkers, but they also have fast defensive capabilities like cloak banshees and medepacks, and the question coming from a lot of people was, what do you see to be the drawback of playing Terran?
Sure. Well, I mean, it depends. It's on a unit-by-unit basis for them, I think, more than anything else. They're less themed, and this is certainly true, I felt like, in the original Brood War as well. Like, I've got a Vulture and a Siege Tank. Vultures are not slow. They're wicked fast, right? And it's on the same thing with the Siege Tank, right? So, we don't tend to think of the races as really tightly themed. I think as tightly themed as the community does. We're just trying to make them as different as possible at the end of the day. And if themes emerge, so be it. Right, so we got feedback, for instance, frequently during beta that when we changed the Roach, food cost, that we'd ruined the race. Now Zerg were not numerous, right? They had a big unit. I was like, well, you know what? There's no way to add a new unit to this game without changing it. right? The race will change. It must change if we add any new units. If you want exactly the same game, please go play Brood War. It's awesome, right? But we are, by the very nature of changing the units, we will change the nature of the race, right? So in the case of Wings of Liberty, we felt like the Zerg felt massable because you would hit with 200 food, but because you could save a billion larvae, you could hit with 200 food again a few, 35 to 45 seconds later. And that felt like the Zerg to us. But we're not as worried about a specific character for the race. That's not what we're trying to do. In terms of, I think what the real feedback is, I'm getting out of what you're saying, is the Terrans feel like they got too much stuff, which is fair enough. Like, I kind of wish all the races felt like they had too much stuff, instead of just the Terrans.
Sure. Looking back at Brood War, one of the the iconic feelings that a lot of people had when they're watching these OSL or MSL or Pro League games was these 200 armies that stretch on for screens long. Yep. You have these mile-long siege lines with mines and mines and mines.
Totally.
And you've been pretty open about the fact that you're not going to make the game worse in its pathfinding.
Well, the pathfinding is going to be what it is, right?
It's going to be what it is. Do you feel this is the right direction, and do you feel there's any issue? A lot of people complain about these 200 balls in StarCraft 2, and people are pretty callous about it, saying they just bang into each other and they die.
Sure.
Do you feel there's an issue there, or is there anything you're looking to correct with it?
We are looking to pull food out of those balls as much as possible, which is the motivation for the Shredder in the first place. Right? We're trying to pull some of the food out of those balls and create some more different small-scale tactics that happen across the map, even in the end game. We get some of that with Terran drops now, which is really nice, but we'd love to pull some of that food out. The Oracle is hoping to pull some food out as well, something that can't really fight with the stack and pull it away. But at the end of the day, we can't make the pathfinding worse. And if that's what this is what StarCraft 2 is, then this is what it is, right? And we can't make the pathfinding worse just to solve that problem. It's not worth it. Sure. So if we find a solution, right, and if we can do stuff to pull food out of the armies by creating units that are designed to be elsewhere than the ball, then we'll definitely do that. And that's kind of what we're hoping to do. But I'm not convinced it's going to solve the problem, right? Like, I think it'll help a little bit, but I still think you'll see big balls of stuff fighting big balls of stuff. There'll just be slightly smaller balls of stuff fighting slightly smaller. So I don't see a fix coming for that anytime soon. If that's what's breaking you for StarCraft 2, then play Brood War. It'll be awesome, right? But yeah, I don't think we have an immediate fix coming for that. But we'll certainly keep working on it.
Sure. Going back to Brood War again, was one of these iconic images you have is the brilliant map control. So you had things like lurkers and siege tanks and mines and arbiters to, sometimes you weren't necessarily engaging an army, but you were positioning so that you're
right. Which we still see some today in TVT, but not as much in the other matchups.
Right. And so obviously the Shredder is kind of an example of a unit where you're looking to control the map. Are there other examples that you're looking at, or?
Well, I think the Swarm Host may get you some of that, right? Because I can plant him down in a fixed position, and he can be swarming over and over again, applying pressure to a certain part of the map. And so I think maybe that will be a unit that also provides some of that board control. So we think we're adding 1.5 to 2 board control units to Heart of the Swarm at this point. Though again, we'll see what actually survives the balance and design process.
A lot of people from the map making community have, been vocal about the fact that we have this big problem where in Brood War we had things like iCup and PG Tour where the community was running the maps, and if we liked a map, we would grab it from Korea and then we would start playing it, and all the pros would play it, and then it would get put into tournaments.
Sure.
But we're at a situation now, because everything's run through the ladder, Liquid Cheth or Liquid Red are not going to pick up a community map to practice on it because it's not worth it for them. And a tournament organizer isn't going to add maps that pros don't play on.
Sure.
So how do we bridge this gap between guys who spend their time trying to make competitive maps but can't get them into tournaments and can't get pros to play on them?
Interesting. That's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that, right? Like, we can't not have ladder.
Sure.
Right? It's a powerful way to play the game, and it's, I think, one of the most fun ways to play the game.
Is there any plan to have community maps?
Well, we're using some GSL maps now.
Sure.
And we'll definitely keep using community caps when you see them. I guess what you're asking for, though, is because obviously there's a big design process that goes on there as well. I'm guessing those maps, when they go to the pros, don't stay static.
Right.
I'm guessing the pros make a bunch of suggestions.
Absolutely.
That map maker makes a ton of fixes, right? So that's what you need, is you need to be able to get the community together to the point where there's enough people playing these maps to give the map maker enough meaningful feedback that he can actually make his map good.
Right.
I'm guessing it didn't come out good, right? It was made good, right, as he went through that review process with everyone else. And so that's the question, is how can you mobilize your community to get that done? It's a good question. I'll certainly take that as feedback and think about that. I don't have a solution for you for that. Okay. That may be up to you guys to figure out how to do that, but I'll certainly work on it.
We've talked about it a lot.
Yeah, I bet.
It's always kind of come down to, unless it's on ladder or unless there's some ability for
Yeah.
pros to play really quickly through
Yeah.
Battle.net, then
Sure.
that's kind of where the
Well, I mean,
divide
there are
is.
ways to pros play quickly. It's just they don't want to,
Right.
right?
There's no-
Why would they
there's
want to
no
play
benefit.
on a partially completed map or a
Right.
pretty good map that's going to be great one-day map,
Right.
right? Yeah, interesting. That's a real problem.
We can leave it. That's fine. We'll leave the question like that.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. That's interesting. Yeah.
With Heart of the Swarm, when you guys, you finished up Wings of Liberty and you start looking at, where are the holes in the game that we want to fix, did you feel any pressure to patch those changes in?
It's too much. It's
Wings
too many
Liberty?
changes. No, there's no way we could
Nothing
possibly do
small?
that. I mean, at this point, if we're changing a range on the Immortal by 1 and the pros are saying you fixed 1-1-1,
Right. Sure.
right? I don't know if I buy that, by the way, but that's still insane. If even one pro said that, that's crazy, right? So there's no way at this point that we would be able to go through even sneaking some of that stuff into the game without having to rebalance the game, which is what we're going to get a chance to do on this one. Let's do a beta again. Nobody's paid for the game. It can be broken, right? But if you go on ladder tonight, I owe it to you to try to get the best balanced game I can for you to have on ladder tonight. If you're playing here in a tournament for $5 or $5,000 or $50,000, I owe it to you to have the very balanced game. We can't just be ninjing in crazy fixes. I get very nervous every time we even do things like remove upgrades. Like, I feel like it's too big a fix, right? That's a very potentially destabilizing fix for us. Sometimes we have to, but it's always scary. I think if we can keep them nice and small, and then especially what we're seeing based on the numbers, what we're seeing from tournament results, we're seeing from pro feedback, what we're seeing from our adjusted win-loss percentage on the ladders, we need to be careful. We're close to 50-50 in almost all of these matchups. There's only a few places. In Protoss versus Terran, if you're in Korea, yeah, you're down 10%, right? And that's real. We got to deal with that. But otherwise, we're doing really well. So we want to be very strategic.
So is Shredder going to affect burrowed units the way it's set up right
Yes.
now? So the Zerg army right now has a lot of, burrowed movement capabilities. So you got, banelings, roaches, infestors.
Sure.
Then you'll have the spawn host is going to be
Yes.
burrowed. Is there any concern there for how that's going to affect Terrans? Forcing them to scan more and use mules less, and was that intentional?
That wasn't intentional. We're not thinking about that metagame that way. You guys are way ahead of us.
Okay.
Right? We're just trying to put in some cool stuff, and we're tuning and polishing and changing and pulling and adding as we go. If we stop and try to totally analyze where everything's going to go, we would never make a move. We'd be too scared, and we would just lock up, right? So that's not necessarily the plan, that would be the case, but that would certainly be an interesting outcome that would affect that balance, right?
The last question. I know that already this isn't your area of expertise, but I kind of want your input on it anyway.
Sure.
I had the chance to talk to Chris Sigurd yesterday, and I had a chance to sit beside him at MLG Anaheim right in the front row when the game started to lag, Boxer versus Idra.
Totally.
And then I met him again last night and it started to lag, and I started teasing him a little bit about LAN.
Right.
And so obviously there's a lot of things Blizzard has to worry about with, IP protection, brand protection, piracy, all these sorts of things. But as esports starts to grow, and it's being mentioned a lot more even in the keynote at the beginning of BlizzCon, do you see a stage where the interests of the esports community and the industry and the teams and the players and the fans begins to put a lot of pressure on those?
We're already got a lot of pressure.
Right, but do you see it being substantial enough to have change?
I don't. I don't think LAN's coming. Right.
And do you think there's anything that's going to happen?
No, I do not.
For tournaments?
We can do something for tournaments.
Sure.
We can try to do something for tournaments, and we're definitely always looking for opportunities for tournaments. But at this point, LAN would be a ton of work for us to even attempt. Everything we're doing is being driven by Battle.net. It's being driven through the live service. All of our maps, all of our lobbies, all of our score screens are being defined by the map coming down from the service. We have to rebuild almost everything at this point in order to do that. So I don't see LAN coming, but anything we can do for the tournaments that we can figure out to do, we'll definitely look at doing.
You obviously have no time frame on that, but is there any plan at all?
We don't have anything in the works specifically. We've had lots of ideas,
Sure.
but nothing specific under construction that I have anything useful to give you
Sure.
in terms of a time frame as to what's coming.
Okay, that's everything.
Cool.
Thanks very much.
Hey, thank you, sir.
Have a great weekend.
Will do.